Good evening, students. Tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 4, Preparedness. Little change in scenery. I've been banished to the basement, so I'm sitting in a rocking chair in the basement, and we're going to discuss preparedness. So what is preparedness? Preparedness is approach, prepares hazardous preparedness, training programs, exercise programs, things of that nature that we basically pre-plan and prepare for what's about to happen. Could it be the next catastrophic flood? Could it be the next, I hope not, the next 9/11? Could it be, a terrorist attack? Could it be tornadoes? We're constantly looking at preparing ourselves for that. So how do we do that? So we look at this preparedness cycle, and we look at it. It's on page 131 of your textbook. If you want to refer to it, I'm going to be talking about it for the next 15 to 20 minutes. So the first stage is planning. And how do we do that? We look at staff. We look at how we evacuate people, how we deal with flooding. Do we bring in sandbags? Is there some other alternative? Can we use sub pumps? When I lived in a flood zone, I decided that I was going to plan for the next flood. I was going to bolt the doors shut, and the first flood, the water pressure got so high on the door, and I was sub pumping it out. My basement was staying relatively dry, and then I realized the little lock on the double doors didn't hold, and it busted the whole entire door off. So I prepared, but it wasn't very effective. So what do we do when we prepare for those types of emergencies, mutual aid? What's taking place in the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C.? It has been on lockdown since pretty much the election, ever since the Capitol riots. Were they prepared for that type of incident where you have 10,000 people marching on D.C., and even a tenth of those making it to the U.S. Capitol, 1,000 people? It overwhelmed resources. And they pushed the panic button, and it didn't work. So obviously, they're going to be looking at their preparedness program. So planning is a very important stage in the whole process. What do we do to prepare for the next disaster? Again, in D.C., it's still, you can't get around the White House because they have concertina wire, and the National Guard is in Washington, D.C. I don't know about you, but that raises a little bit of a concern for me. Although we're not privy to the intelligence, why is the Capitol still on lockdown? I'm not quite understanding that. Is there an outside threat to the White House that we don't know about? But it is kind of alarming that we still have all those thousands of guard troops in Washington, D.C. And they're planning on something happening. I don't know what that is, but something major is thinking of taking place or may take place. The second stage after planning is the equipment. What equipment does the organization need to handle the situation? The perfect crisis, and I hate to even say the word because everybody's getting annoyed with it, it's the COVID-19. We were crying the blues about these PPEs, personal protection equipment. We need it. We don't have it. We're making it and selling it to other countries, and we're building all these respirators, and we had all these companies that were building respirators, and now we had so many respirators we don't know what to do with. There's still a stockpile at the farm show complex in Harrisburg of PPEs that we just don't know what to do with. We now have all this that we prepared for, and we prepared very well for them, and we planned well. We got the equipment out there, Now, how do we get the equipment to the resources that we need? Okay, what type of equipment is needed for our first responders? Again, post 9/11, they started South Central Task Force, where a group of police officers from the entire Middle District of Pennsylvania would go down and train together, so that we knew if there was another catastrophe or a terrorist attack, we could summon these police officers on the South Central Task Force. There were hundreds of officers that conducted training together. They got the proper equipment. They were giving us shields, uh, guns. They were giving us body armor, all this stuff for free, so that we're prepared for the next attack if there was. So we got to make sure that we have the proper equipment, which leads into number 3, which is the training. Okay, what you're going to find out as you get into your jobs, training is very expensive. Training employees is very expensive. For example, you take the police department. If we have 2 people or 5 people that's supposed to be on the street, and we got 2 people out on crisis response team training, we're now taking resources from the street. So training is expensive as it pertains to manpower. You're not getting anything out of that person for that entire training that you have somebody out. We look at the fire department. They do training every Tuesday night in East Pennsboro. Every Tuesday night, they bring in all their fire trucks in, all their manpower in, and they practice. Whether it's just setting up hoses or getting ready to deal with a rollover crash or a house fire, they do a lot of training. Training is very important because, as the military says, you train like you practice. Or, it's late at night. Training is essential. You always revert back to your training when you're in high stress situations. Sorry, it's late at night, and I'm here in the basement doing the lecture. So if you look at the military, that's about all they do for 4 years is train, 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 train. When they enter that door or kick a door, they know how to do it because they're training and they're ready to respond to that incident. So it's very important that we have training in place for all the people involved so that we're ready to handle that situation. Okay? The next stage is an exercise. I just said it, practice makes perfect. You gotta be able to handle an exercise. I'll give you another perfect example. Last Thursday, I'm on the crisis response team where I'm a negotiator, and we have the SRT team, which is the special response team. We're basically on the same team, but a lot of times we train separately because what we deal with is negotiations. How do we deal and negotiate with people in crisis? Okay, the SRT team is the special response team that are armed and specialized, that they practice entries into buildings and houses. But when we get a call out, we go together as a team. So we practice as a team exercise. And last Thursday in the elements, it was snowing, if you remember, we practiced as a team on how to handle a hostage negotiation where we had to negotiate with role players in a realistic to where negotiations were going well. They broke down. The SRT team did a hostage recovery situation where they entered the residence and they backed out when they got the hostage out. They didn't back out, but they held their position. And then we negotiated with the hostage taker until the hostage taker finally gave up. So we certainly practice makes perfect. So we spent 8 hours as a team practicing to handle that situation. And obviously, step 5, which is evaluate and improve. We spent 7 hours training. We spent another hour. In fact, they were still talking as we left we break it down in situations. How do we improve what just transpired here during the day? And we broke down as negotiators and discussed how we make it better. They broke down as an SRT team. How do they do it better? And then we broke down as a team. If we had any issues with the SRT and how their response was, and then they had any questions for how to improve for the negotiators. And it's a round robin. There's no rank involved. It's how do we improve? When you look at post 9/11, that's about all they did was critique how the NYPD first responders responded to that catastrophic event. If you look post Katrina, President Bush took a pretty good beating that FEMA wasn't prepared for a Category 4 storm to hit Louisiana. And it was a mess. Were they properly prepared? And I know the buck stops with President Bush, but this preparedness and this planning stages and these evaluations don't start overnight. These start in years and years and years to come. Now we know what mistakes we made at Katrina. So as we're rebuilding Louisiana, we're trying not to make those same mistakes that we did last time. So if you look at this circle, and on the inner circle, it talks about, you know, implement enhancements, exercising and training, reassessing the situation, assessing the threat, assessing vulnerability, and shortfall requirements. So we keep evaluating what we did. Okay. I went through a command staff training one time. It was actually at Central Penn College, but it was through the Cumberland County, and we did scenarios. We all did scenarios. Then we went through them. We reassessed them. How do we make it different? Then we went into the scenario again and did it again. And we actually spent a whole day going in and talking about how we reassessed the situation, and we did it different next time. Again, every situation, I want to stress to you that every situation is different. Not every hurricane hits the exact same spot. Not every fire hits the same forest. So our situations are different during every different scenario. Look at 9/11. It landed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, but was the state police prepared for an aircraft crash landing in Somerset County? Was the Pentagon prepared for an airplane strike to the Pentagon? Obviously, now we know that airplanes are used as weapons. And then we started talking about, okay, well, now we need to reinforce the cockpits. Do we give the captains in the airplane weapons to protect themselves? Those are things that after post 9/11 we kept reassessing. How do we make sure this does not happen again? Do we need to use better metal detectors? Do we need to search? If you go in and you've flown since 9/11, you can see massive changes post 9/11 trying to get through the mess they call the airports. They tell you to arrive over 2 hours early so that you can simply get through screening process. So the whole process post 9/11 has changed, and that was a terrorist attack. So I want to talk about real quick mitigation and preparedness, and how these two functions overlap. The major distinction between the two functions is characterized by a mission of the action themselves, which calls into play the definitions that have provided for mitigation preparedness. In simple terms, mitigation attempts to eliminate hazard risk by reducing either the likelihood or consequences of risk associated with the potential hazard. So we're trying to mitigate the hazard. What are some of the mitigation? I just talked about it 1 minute ago. when we screen people before they go on a flight, we're trying to mitigate risk. Okay? We don't need to be prepared for it as much as we need to mitigate it. Okay? We need to stop it prior to anybody getting on with a gun or a bomb or a dirty bomb or anything like that. So, preparedness seeks to improve the abilities of the agencies and individuals to respond to consequences of a disaster once the disaster has occurred. So, if you remember mitigation, when you get on a plane, we're trying to stop a terrorist attack or a plane from being hijacked. But if we look at preparedness, we're trying to be prepared for an incident. How do we handle, now that the airplane has been taken over, how have we been prepared enough to handle that situation? Do we have a flight attendant or a captain engage the suspects on a plane that are armed and have taken hostages? I don't know what those answers are, and a lot of those answers we don't know because they don't release those efforts to the public. Remember, the terrorist attack hasn't hit the United States since 9/11. And you think about, I can guarantee you that there's been hundreds of attempts thwarted over the last several decades. Hundreds of attempts. I've read some of those attempts because I get bulletins and things like that where they release some of the information, but not a lot of information because they don't want the public to be aware of it. So that's the difference between mitigation and preparedness, and I wanted to cover that. The rest of the chapter deals with whole community concepts, which is part of your homework assignment for the week. So I just wanted to go through some of it. They talk about evacuation planning. How do we evacuate people, and how does the planning go about? Imagine when the hurricanes hit Florida, their preparedness is very good. How does their planning and evacuation work? They actually open both north and southbound lanes of Interstate 95 for all travel to go northbound. So they shut down I-95 to where you can't drive south into Florida because you shouldn't be driving into Florida because of it's a disaster area. So they're all driving northbound. Those are some of the things that we look at when we're planning what's taking place. I'll give you a good tidbit. And I learned this years ago. Can you tell me why the interstates in the United States were built? Why did we need interstates? Dwight D. Eisenhower built the interstates throughout this country, big, large highways going across the country in all different corners of the country. It's still subsidized by the federal government, and the federal government helps pay to keep the interstate highways up. I'll tell you why. For military purposes, so that we could move large pieces of machinery across the country in an event that somebody attacked the United States. It's one of the reasons they built the interstate highway. It's not for you and I to go 95 on Interstate 81 because it's a nice straight shot through the state. They did it so that we could move our troops and our equipment rapidly through the country. I'll tell you another little tidbit. Did you ever drive down the highway and see a truck with like these large missiles that are carried throughout the country? How do they move them through the country and nobody knows? They're hidden in tractor trailers, unmarked tractor trailers with armed personnel, and you don't know that. because you just look at a regular tractor trailer. They're just driving down the highway, and they're moving ammunition, explosives, missiles. Kind of a little tidbit, just as a little interesting fact, since we're talking about some of this stuff. The rest of the chapter you're going to probably cover in your homework. Sorry, I'm a few nights behind. I'm still getting caught up at work. It's been quite stressful, the long hours, as you can probably tell. I get up in the morning, go to work, come home late at night. I know it's no excuse, but we'll get through this semester. Everybody's doing well. I'm very happy. After reading your homework assignments and the discussion boards, I'm glad that you're learning something in class. I'm going to post something probably tomorrow on your research project. You need to start thinking about your research project. So I'm going to have a short video talking about your research project, and it'll be listed under coursework. Get your homework done. Good luck. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week.